Our panellists tonight are part of a generation who will spend much of their working lives paying off the massive debts we've built up during this COVID crisis. Their lifetime incomes will be shaped by this moment. They're also amongst the hardest hit right now. Instead of making plans and dreaming big, many are stressed and anxious. They're trying to study remotely, find work and grapple with the rising cost of uni fees. So what does the future look like for this COVID generation and how are they going to shape it? You've got lots of questions tonight, so let's get you some answers. Welcome to Q&A. Hi there, welcome to the program. Joining me tonight, university student and musician from southwestern Sydney, Hamani, Tanginoa. Fifth generation Menindee farmer Kate McBride, whose viral videos helped highlight the extent of the Darling River water crisis. Education entrepreneur Scott Jung, who ran as the Liberal candidate for Cogra in last year's New South Wales election. In Melbourne, youth advocate Ahmed Hassan, who works with disadvantaged youth and was recently hospitalised after testing positive to COVID-19. Also ready to join the conversation tonight, some of Australia's youngest federal politicians, the Liberal Senator for New South Wales, Andrew Bragg, the Labor MP for Lilley, Anika and the Green Senator for WA, Jordon Steele-John, who's in Perth tonight. And we're also expecting mental health to be a big issue tonight. So for some additional expertise and insights, specialist researcher in youth mental health, Professor Helen Christensen, is here from the Black Dog Institute. Would you please make all of them feel welcome? And remember, you can stream us on iView, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Quanda is the hashtag. We always invite our panellists to join in a robust but respectful debate, and we do ask that if you're getting involved on social media that you also do it respectfully. Our first question tonight comes from Charmaine Spencer.
18 to 29-year-olds have copped a lot of criticism throughout the pandemic. Myself and other young people I know have done our best to stop the spread, but most of the people living in my suburb are over 50 and I still see them out and about as if nothing has changed. But the majority of the discourse in the media, even here on the ABC, is that it's young people who are to blame for spreading the virus, ignoring the health advice and not respecting their elders. I've barely heard any compassion for us, despite the fact that this is supposed to be the best years of our life and will be the generation who is affected by this for the majority of our lives. So my question to the panel is, when will young people stop being blamed for the pandemic?
Scott.
Yeah, thank you for your question. And I think all Australians across all backgrounds, young and old, I think we've played a massive part in suppressing the pandemic. Outside of Victoria, and I feel for those in Victoria, Ahmed, that we've done so well in putting on our masks, in staying our social distancing, and we've done really well in that. And I think the message we need to be sending tonight to all Australians is that we're all in it together. This is not a blame game. It's when teamwork kicks in that we're going to get results.
Do you feel, Kate, that young people are being blamed more than any other particular demographic grouping?
I think at times we see some young people making decisions that aren't exactly in the greatest interest of the rest of Australia, and at times we are getting tarred with that same brush. But, there's a lot of young people that understand that we need to protect our grandparents and our parents as well. And, from what I've seen, young people are very considerate of what's going on, and that we can play a really sort of terrible role in spreading this virus if we're doing the wrong things. And so it's great to see young people. We are taking it on board and we're listening to what's going on.
Ahmed, I know it took you totally by surprise. Talk us through what it was like actually discovering that you had COVID.
It was a bit of a difficult run with COVID, but look, within 24 to 48 hours, it built up in my body, and I was in hospital on the Monday night, and I've never felt something like that before, especially within the first 48 hours of being admitted to an emergency ward.
What did it feel like, Ahmed?
Oh, just my whole body was shaking. It took full control of it, and I couldn't even, stand up, walk, and it was extremely difficult. And I never experienced something like that, and I didn't know what it was at the time. So I was rushed to emergency, and spent a couple of days there recovering, and I was the youngest person in there at the time. There was about 20 Victorians in hospital, and I was one of them.
That must have been terrifying.
It was, and I had a couple of doors down was my grandmother who was suffering at the time. So you could just understand, everything going through your mind. Nurses, doctors, infectious disease control doctors who are continuously coming in, calming you down. Expressing all these difficult things like you're going through this journey, and they've actually supported. I thank the frontline, that the nurses and the doctors. They've done so much to kind of make the community go through this as best as possible, and I'm very grateful to them. We couldn't have done this without them. So yeah.
I know you were trying desperately to talk to your grandmother during all of that.
Yes, it was. She didn't speak the language, and I was trying to speak to the doctors at the time and say to them, "Listen, I want to go speak to my grandmother. Tell her what the she didn't understand the language. She's stressed. She had an oxygen mask on. So it was." It was a very, very difficult time. I said, I've got COVID, she's got COVID, let me go to the, her bedroom and explain to her. And they said, sorry, this kind of support is not available, and we'll have to get someone off that speaks a different language.
Hamani, do you see what Charmaine was talking about there, younger people being blamed? The WHO has said that it's now young people that are largely spreading the virus. The government television advertising in Australia is clearly focused on young people. Do you feel that young people are sort of being blamed?
I 100% agree. But before I start that question, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're all on, which is the Gadigal land of the Eora Nation. Acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. I completely agree with that statement. Young people are being blamed for this pandemic, but what most people don't understand is that it's not a young people problem, it's a human problem. You can see that the majority of the people that are not sticking by restrictions are considered middle-aged. If you see the videos online on social media, particularly a lot of people such as Bunnings and all that sort of stuff. But that's what we need to kind of consider, that it's not just young people, it's everybody. And that's what no one's talking about that properly.
All right. On that note, I want to bring in our next question. It's a video from Maria Reglich in Mossman in New South Wales.
Good evening, panel. Why are all these young people complaining? I am first year of the baby boomers. We did not have very much. Came through life to make do. Go without, look after what you have, work hard and save. Not this throwaway society the young live in now, and expect. They are not prepared to sacrifice. Whatever goes wrong is not their fault, and they are not prepared to do whatever it takes to get on. Life is not perfect. Compromise, that is life.
Ahmed, they're not prepared to sacrifice. Whatever goes wrong is not their fault.
It's a very easy thing to point the finger, this generation pointing the finger against the younger generation and saying, look, we suffered through this. But currently young people are suffering so much, and they're sacrificing as much as they can. They've sacrificed their education, they've sacrificed their jobs. Their mental health is in a very dire state. And what else do you want them? They've sacrificed a lot. Their sporting activity, their hobbies, a lot of things. They're staying at home. And for the older generation to say, look, we've gone through this, we've done this. Young people are suffering, and I think they are sacrificing everything they can. We shouldn't point the finger. I think we should all work together and say, how can we beat this virus?
Kate?
The reality is that we're all having to compromise right now. I've just finished uni and I probably won't be able to graduate all my friends who have finished in the past have been able to, and we all need to make compromises at a time like this. And it's not just young people that are, having to compromise, it's all of us. And yeah, we've got to all come together and work together, and there's no point in pointing the fingers and saying that, no one's had to suffer. We're all going through a hardship that no one has experienced before, and we're all being affected in different ways, whether you're rural or from the city. And I think we need to listen to how everyone's coping and how they're struggling, because that's what Australians do. We all come together when times are tough and understand how people are feeling.
Do you feel this sort of push between the generations, though, at this point in time, Kate?
Yeah, I think so, particularly within the city. I look at, being from rural Australia sort of thing. it's more that we're all in this together. We're all suffering. We're all experiencing the same things out in rural Australia, and it doesn't matter whether you're young or old. You know, we're sticking by each other, and I guess that's probably a bit of a difference about living in rural Australia, is there's less of us out there, and we're all on the same team.
Hamani, that was a question about young people being prepared to sacrifice. I know you had a job lined up this year. You were going to be working at the YMCA. What happened to your employment?
Yeah, I think I kind of suffered a loss with this pandemic. Kind of compromised uni, gone online. Doing a music performance degree online is quite difficult. I did have a job lined up, and due to some funding that, due to funding, I wouldn't be able to hop on board. But, yeah.
How do you view this, Scott?
Yeah, I think everyone's suffering right now, Hamish, and everyone's going through a very, very tough time. I know a lot of my young friends and older friends who have lost their jobs, whose businesses have flourished for 5 to 10 years. For those in their family businesses, over 20 years. Restaurants, for example, they've gone down the drain. So everyone's going through a very tough time. I think as Australians, we also have to have an optimistic outlook on what's ahead. And I think with the pandemic, with the crisis, there is opportunity. And the big question, for a lot of us tonight, and for Australians to think about back at home, is how do we make the most of the next boom, which could be a few years away.
We are going to get to that, but how do you react when you hear an Australian refer to your generation in that way, in that question?
I think everyone's suffering. And I think at the end of the day, I've got my own challenges to worry about. I started my own small business in March. We signed the lease for the 1st of March, right during a couple of weeks before the lockdown, Hamish. And I think everyone's just trying to make life easier for one another. I'm not in the mood of firing back. I think we've got to help each other out.
All right. Let's take our next question tonight. It's a video from Siobhan O'Connor in Canberra.
I'm a uni student, and when we went into lockdown, I lost all my jobs. Uni moved to online, which meant that I was stuck inside all the time. My mental health took a huge hit, and I spiraled and desperately needed help. I can't get an appointment with a psychologist or psychiatrist for weeks, sometimes months and months, because they are so overrun due to COVID-19. The counsellor I contacted was not covered by Medicare, which meant that it was unaffordable for me. What is the government going to do about the availability for mental health services, especially during COVID-19?
Okay, at this point I want to bring in Helen Christensen, who's here from the Black Dog Institute. Can you just, from an informational point of view, what is actually available? Where are the gaps for young people on this?
I think we've already heard where the gaps are, or some of the gaps are. But what we're finding is around 75% of young people say they have mental health problems or
75%?
concern. Yes, and around adults it's around 45%. So the reality is young people are doing it harder. And if you look at the reasons, we're not in an even playing field here. Young people don't have jobs. It's easier to keep a job rather than get a new one. The number of hours available to young people is much lower than for older people. There's greater wage return if you're an older person. So it's not an equal playing field. And I think we have to be aware that young people are doing it hard, and for very good reasons.
The federal government has made an extra 10 Medicare subsidised psychological therapy sessions available for Victorians, for the rest of us. So that takes it to 20, I think. For everyone else, it's 10. Yeah. Is that enough? Does that solve this sort of huge challenge that appears to be in front of us?
It's not going to solve the problem. The problem is that our way of doing mental health care is very rigid. So people are allowed 10 sessions. Those sessions are an hour each, and there are only so many psychologists and psychiatrists who are available. So you can't actually get more efficient. Unless you get more efficient in the way in which you deliver health care, you're going to be stuck with a problem that you won't be able to get access. So there are ways that people are thinking about how we can change that, and there's something called blended care, where a person has less time with a clinician, but they do digital or online therapies as homework. These are evidence-based. And it's been found that if you have a single person delivering these sorts of therapies, they can see 9 more people in terms of their time and their efficiency than just one-on-one.
So
we have to get smarter. We could get smarter about how we do it.
I want to go to Ahmed. You're in Melbourne. Can you give us a sense of how acute this mental health issue is amongst young people you're dealing with there during this second phase of lockdown?
Absolutely. Young people here in Melbourne are struggling and absolutely struggling. And I'm going to talk about new and emerging communities and multicultural communities who I work with, especially vulnerable young people. And I spoke to a young person about a fortnight ago, and when we were having just chat, he said, look, I'm very stressed. You know, I live in a household, you know, no job, you know, 5 kids, you know, all of us around the house. We're all crammed in the one house. There is nothing to look forward to. You can't go outside. It's only 1 hour exercise. You come back. And, you know, he said, you know, me, my friends, you know, if we were ever experiencing anything, we'd never call some of these numbers like Lifeline or Beyond Blue. And he goes, you know, our culture does not, you know, we've never been brought up to kind of call numbers and speak to a psychologist or speak to different health professionals. And that really brought the case to me. And I said, what do we do to fix this? You give me your first-hand experience. And he said, we need tailored and targeted supports to young people at grassroots level that engage with them, engage with their families, engage with the young person, and, you know, meet an outcome. It's easy to just talk to a young person, but he said we need tailored and targeted, something that's culturally sensitive, also, you know, works alongside the different faiths and backgrounds they come from.
Ahmed, I wonder if you could share with us, before we came on air, you mentioned to me that your phone has become like a call centre in recent weeks. What are people calling you asking for? What do they need?
Unfortunately, you know, in Victoria, there's a lot of people who've fallen through the gap. A lot of families, a lot of young people who've fallen through the gap. Some families that are here on permanent residency who don't even have food. You know, they're contemplating either paying, you know, the rent or feeding their children. And this is very hard. And, you know, when you speak to different people, they say, why don't they access the hardship payment? You know, they've never accessed any of these support services in their lives before. They were working families. They were here, you know, they were able to sustain themselves over a long period of time. But this COVID really, you know, the pandemic's really brought them to their knees. And, you know, some of these families can't get you know, support, and every time you speak to different people, they say, oh, there's hardship payments, you know, rent relief, there's this. Families have had to move out, families have had to, you know, miss meals. So it's really dire out there, and some families are really struggling and falling through the gaps.
Kate, access to mental health services is already an issue in rural and regional areas. Give us a picture of what it's like now.
Oh, it's definitely been made worse by certain things that people are having to deal with, being separated from families, not being able to see kids when they're in different states and things like that. But as you said, like, we know that regional and rural Australia have significantly higher suicide and self-harm rates. And that's something that hasn't been addressed. And, you know, part of that has got to do with the digital connectivity that we have. We don't have the option in some places to even pick up a phone and call places like Lifeline. And I think this is something we seriously need to look at, not just throughout this pandemic, but even before this pandemic, that our rural Australians are struggling.
Hamani, I know you've had some issues yourself with mental health. How are you finding this time? How's the isolation? How are you coping?
Be quite honest, it's quite hard being in isolation, but I know it's the right thing to do because I'd rather be inside and not interact with anybody than go out and get sick. I do have that feeling of anxiety and that stress of uncertainty of when this is gonna end well, isn't gonna end bad. Because you don't know what's going to happen in 3 weeks or next week or tomorrow. So that's what I think in the back of my mind.
And if you don't mind sharing, have you been supported? Have you been offered help? Have you reached out to any of these services? Yeah,
I've reached out like before COVID. I've reached out during COVID. I've reached out. I'm quite grateful that I have services that are available in my area. I know that there are other areas, especially in rural Australia, they're in hardly any, little to none. So yeah, I'm quite thankful that I have these services available near me.
All right. Well, I should point out that if you or anyone you know needs support, there's a range of support services. We talk about them regularly here, but always worth reminding you the contacts for Lifeline, as well as the Coronavirus Mental Health Support Line and the Kids Helpline are now on your screen. And we might talk to Helen through this evening to hear her feedback on how these conversations are proceeding tonight. Our next question comes from Katie Walker.
Young people living in Western Sydney already have less opportunity and access than many others. We also come from more diverse and lower socioeconomic backgrounds. Housing affordability already seems impossible for us before COVID. Now COVID has taken our jobs and independence. How can we look towards the future of living in our own homes and not having to rely on our parents when jobs seem impossible to get and the government does not want to increase or continue government allowances? Will we ever be independent again?
Scott.
Thank you for your question, and it's a common challenge amongst a lot of our friends that I'm talking to, a lot of my friends in the St George area. Look, I think before we go into housing affordability, it's always been challenging, but I feel like what we got to be doing is how do we create more jobs? And I feel like in terms of education, we should have an education curriculum that really prepares people for the workplace. How do we take advantage of the next boom, which is, as I've shared to Hamish before, in 5 to 10 years' time? And when you're looking, we've got to identify those industries. Those industries could be energy, renewable energy, for example. Small businesses. I think small businesses account for over 50% of jobs and a third of production. But when we're going to university or at the end of high school, there's barely anything that prepares you for those skills and for those roles. So I feel like what universities and schools need to be doing is really equipping with young adults, even before we graduate out of high school, to really be excelling in those jobs of the future. And if Australians could be the best in the world, then we don't need other people coming to our country. Of course, we welcome immigration, but Australian jobs for Australians first. And I feel like one of the things we could do, Hamish, is, for example, replacing legal studies with entrepreneurship. Rather than teaching kids how to sue each other, let's get them to learn how to start businesses.
I want to just be clear, are you saying less migration?
More migration,
right,
but Australian jobs first for Australians.
So what does that mean?
I think that means really building our own backyard, in our own backyard, people that are ready to take on these jobs, whether it's...
But if you're getting migration, don't you want those people working as well?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think, Hamish, I hear where you're coming from. I think those jobs need to be given to Australians first, but Australians got to be ready to step up to be good enough for those jobs. And I think that's why in education, we need to be preparing our young people for that. And, you know, myself, for example, when I'm starting my business in March, I mean, setting up a business, getting product to market fit, all those kind of things. I did it not because of school. I mean, I went to Sydney Boys High School. None of those things were taught. And I just feel like, you know, those skills are so important, Hamish.
Even looking at what industries we have options in going down. I was speaking to a bloke from Adelaide Uni today, and he said there are 5 to 6 jobs for every single ag graduate at the moment. And I think agriculture can be a really important sector to try and get us out of this COVID issue when it comes to the economy. But even kids understanding that there are jobs out in the ag industry, and that's not just jobs, you know, for the future after you finish a degree. There are jobs right now. If you get out and you leave the city a little bit, go a couple hours out, there are jobs harvesting at the moment because, of course, we've lost a lot of backpackers because of coronavirus, they've gone home. There are jobs for young people, and I'm not saying all young people, there's still going to be unemployment, but we need to start looking at, you know, where we can go down and how we're going to get out of this issue, and I think agriculture has a really important role to play in that.
Kate, I'm interested because you're someone that moves quite a bit between the city and the bush because of your studies in Adelaide. Do you find more of your friends now talking about the possibility of moving, maybe not to the bush, but at least to a regional area?
Oh, I'm trying to advertise it all the time, but the reality is...
I know you're trying to advertise it. I want to know if they're serious about doing it.
Well, the reality is we're seeing, you know, we're losing our population out in the bush. I saw New South Wales government released data saying Barwon, so the electorate I'm from, it's about 40% of New South Wales. They expect in the next 20 years that we're going to lose about 15% of our population. Now, that's really scary because the reality is we're already such an urbanised country. 85% of Australians live within 50 kilometres of the state. So we need to be attracting people out into these rural areas, but unfortunately at the moment we're not, and I think that's got a lot to do with things like the quality of life and, you know, other issues. But I think, you know, the government needs to stand up and try and get people out to these areas because we're trying to advertise it. We love our life out in the country, New South Wales.
All right, let's take our next question tonight. It's a video from Steve Friel in Ormond, Victoria.
As a working family in their 30s, we were concerned to see not only the federal government allow early access to superannuation, but also advocate for it. What impacts do we think this will have on people of my generation, but also my children who have yet to even start school?
All right, I do want to get to the pollies in a moment, but I'm just going to take a bit of a straw poll here. Has anyone taken out their super early? Hamani, have you?
I think I have like 2 cents in mine, so I don't
Okay, so yeah.
any.
Kate, have you taken out any super?
No, I'm still working, thankfully.
How about you, Scott?
I've got too many super accounts, I'm confused.
Okay, confused. And Ahmed, how about you?
I haven't taken it out yet.
Okay. All right, let's bring in the politicians. I'm going to welcome Andrew Bragg, the Liberal Senator for New South Wales, Anika Wells, who is the Labor MP for Lilley, and in Perth, Green Senator for WA, Jordon Steele-John. Welcome to you all. Anika Wells, what are the impacts for people of this generation if they do take their super out now?
Well, I think, first and foremost, this is one of the great acts of intergenerational theft that we have seen from an Australian government. And my question to people like Andrew, who are out there beating the drum on this policy and suggesting that it's going to allow young people like Katie to buy her first home in Western Sydney, is what is the end game here?
What do you mean by theft? Who's stealing the money? I mean, these are individuals taking money that is there for them eventually now.
Yeah, but superannuation is a covenant of trust between the employer and the industry or retail super funds to provide for dignity in retirement for all people. Our generation needs that money just as the current generations need that money. And my question to people like Andrew who've been saying this will actually solve things like affordable housing for people like Katie in Western Sydney is what is the end game when we all end up in our old age in our overpriced shacks with no retirement nest eggs left to speak of, and the next generation's government is tasked with providing for a decent aged pension for everybody with no money to do it. I mean, I think if you were to actually go away and try and devise a policy that would decimate the budget in the long term, that would drive up the cost of housing even further and would strategically disadvantage the youngest and most vulnerable people in our community, this is the kind of policy that would do it. It's a no from me, 0 stars.
OK, Andrew Bragg, I know you will give it more stars than that, but I want to put some figures to you. Nikki Hutley from Deloitte Access Economics says that for someone pulling out their super now that's at the early stages of their career, that money will be worth $60,000 in 20 years' time, or potentially $120,000 because of the value of compound interest. This is not a good deal for young people at all, is it?
Hamish, the biggest problem with super for young people is the system doesn't actually work. So,
but hold on, that's not the question. This is about whether it's a good deal for young people. If they take the money out now, they're not going to get $60,000 or $120,000 down the track. They're just going to get that amount now.
Well, actually, the majority of people that have taken money out of their super during the pandemic have used it to pay off debts and have used it to pay down their mortgage. So they've improved their personal balance sheets. Well, that's what the ABS data shows. Now, the best thing you can do from a financial point of view is to secure your own home. The best way to avoid poverty in retirement is to actually have your own home. So if you're renting in retirement, it's going to be a pretty difficult retirement for you.
But I suppose the point is, Andrew, though, if you have nothing left in your super but you do have a house, then aren't a lot more people going to be reliant on the state pension?
But the problem with that, Hamish, is that super doesn't get many people off the pension. I mean, it doesn't get many people off the pension. You're looking at 70%
perhaps not in
reliance.
full, but significant amounts.
It actually doesn't, and it costs the budget more than it saves. So it damages home ownership prospects, it costs a bomb to the budget, and doesn't get people off the pension. So it is really a bad deal for young people. Young people and home ownership is really a major problem for our country. I want to live in a country where people can own homes.
Can you point to any examples of young people taking their super out now and actually achieving home ownership?
There are many people that have taken money out of their super to pay off mortgages, to pull together a deposit for a home. Yes, you said that. I'm just asking if you have a single example of a young Australian taking their money out now and becoming a homeowner because of it. So I've had several people write to me and say that if you give up on your agenda to try and allow people access to their super for a first home deposit, I'll never have a home because the only
Senator
chance
Bragg,
I've got...
You heard the question. You're just not answering it. Do you have a single example?
Well, the answer is yes.
You have examples of people buying houses?
I can provide 3 that have written to me in recent months.
Okay.
The reason Andrew can't offer any examples, Hamish, is because he's a prophet offering false hope. Like Hamani just said, the average 25-year-old has 16 grand in their super account. 16 grand is not affording a 20% deposit in any of the capital cities. So there's no deposit in that. And the average 25-year-old is in insecure work, part-time work, casual work. So no bank's giving them a mortgage anyway. That's why he hasn't got any examples to offer us, because it's not going to work.
Jordon, Steele-John?
Well, I think that if folks are withdrawing the little that we've scraped together in our super accounts as young people, it's because the government's response to the crisis has been inadequate or has oftentimes made things worse. I think of a friend of mine here in Fremantle, hi Ange, if you're watching at home. She was planning on becoming a youth worker before the crisis hit. COVID put a stop to that, so she went to retrain as went to study actually in the arts and humanities space, only to then be hit by a doubling of the university degree price. And I think what we see here replicated over and over again, whether it be in super or any other area of the government response, is a clear and urgent need for more young people in Parliament, particularly young women of colour, to make these plans and craft these proposals. To be blunt with you, Hamish, the male, pale and painfully stale monopoly on power needs to be broken. It is failing our generation.
You're getting applause from the audience here, Jordon. I don't know if you can hear that in Perth.
I could hear a little bit of it. Thank you very much.
Just speaking of access to Parliament, you're in Perth tonight. Just explain why you're not travelling to Canberra for this parliamentary sitting. What are the obstacles for you?
Well, as a disabled person, I've got cerebral palsy, some of you might know, and so as a wheelchair user and somebody with CP, I'm more heightened risk from COVID-19, and so I've been advised by my doctors to attend a Parliament remotely, which I've been able to do today once we got around a couple of technical issues.
Because although you can attend remotely, you can't vote.
No.
Does that?
Yes.
I mean, is this effectively discriminating against you?
Well, I think that there is an issue around how do we integrate these modern forms of technology into the parliamentary system, Hamish. I think that we're seeing Parliament dragged kicking and screaming into the 21st century in many ways, and that is, in some ways, a good thing.
Anika Wells, I know you told our producers that a bunch of pregnant MPs got together and basically demanded this remote access. What exactly did you have to do to get this change?
Well, I think we made the point that if we didn't evolve and provide flexible options for people to participate in the Parliament, the sitting week that we are in this week would actually look like sitting weeks from 20 years ago, before Parliament got a little bit more diverse and a little bit more representative of the communities that we represent out there.
So what was the situation for you? I mean, would you have been able to attend if circumstances were different?
Well, I had a couple of different things working against me. I have third trimester of a twin pregnancy. I'm a caregiver for my 3-year-old back home, and then the different state quarantine restrictions. The Queensland ones hadn't been determined yet, so we were waiting to hear what would happen. And I would note that, you know, there are some pregnant women here this week in Parliament and some in Victoria who didn't make it. So we haven't got there yet. And I think the cold, hard truth that we all need to accept, we being all elected representatives here in Canberra, is that at the moment, the people that we most need to hear from are the people who are finding it hardest to get here in the first place. And the answer to that is making it easier for them to get there, be it with more flexible Parliament and with making sure that we elect people who come from diverse backgrounds and offer those experiences to the Parliament, so that when we make these massive decisions about policy, when we make choices that will have consequences for 50 years to come, the people that will be facing those consequences, the young people that you have in the Sydney studio tonight, actually participated in their own destiny.
OK, let's take our next question. It's a video from Bella Mitchell-Sears in West Footscray, Victoria.
I'm a Year 12 student currently studying in Victoria's Stage 4 lockdown, and my question is for the politicians of the panel, specifically Senator Andrew Bragg. As a young woman with an interest in politics from a young age, I planned on next year studying an arts degree to pursue a political career, as many have before me. However, recent changes by your government has seen the price of my degree skyrocket, making a political career seem further out of reach. How do you justify drastically increasing the price of my tertiary education, especially in already unstable economic times? How do you justify the implementation of policy ensuring that only the wealthy have the opportunity to govern the country?
We'll come to you, Andrew Bragg, but I'm going to put that to Jordon Steele-John first.
Thank you. Look, I think that is a fantastic question. If you are studying the arts and the humanities, like, these are amazing fields to be pursuing and to be working in. And you should be celebrated and supported to do that. The idea, well, the reality that we are doubling people's degrees, that we are kicking people off the HEC system for failing a couple of units, this is not only not okay, there is a deep hypocrisy at the heart of this policy. 16 members of the coalition government went to university for free. The arts minister proposing this change, enforcing it, has 3 arts degrees. I think what we have here is yet another example of one generation denying opportunities to our generation that they themselves enjoyed. What we need to do is make university free again and abolish all student debt. That's what students need, and that's what the Greens are pushing for.
Jordon, I just want to pick you up on that, though, because the panel tonight has already talked about the need to make sure that the education system is feeding into what the jobs of the future are going to be. And it's pretty clear that we need more people in some of these other areas. Why is the government wrong to incentivise that within the tertiary sector in the way that they're doing?
Well, there's a couple of pieces here. One thing, Hamish, is that we've got to recognise that education is a human right and a public good, and that a university degree, a TAFE degree, is as important today as a high school exit certificate was, generations ago. Now, I sat on the committee that looked into this question, the Senate inquiry into the next 25 years of work, and the message that we got back from all the wonderful people, including young people that gave evidence to that inquiry, was that the future of employment in Australia is in the caring industries. It is the face-to-face industries. It is the arts and humanities. That is the future of employment in the aged care sector, in the NDIS, in these areas of work that are almost impossible to automate and to get rid of. So it's actually counter to the evidence of what we know, even in the space of STEM, where everybody that is worth their salt will tell you that STEM is only as valuable as it can be if it is included and wrapped around with the arts and the humanities.
OK, let Senator Andrew Bragg answer this. For Bella's situation, her degree will more than double in price, up 113%. How do you justify that?
Well, Bella, thanks for your question, and good on you for wanting to study a BA. I did a BA, but I have to say I paid more for my business degree than I did for my BA. It wasn't all that long ago.
How much do you pay for your Bachelor of Arts?
Well, maybe 20,000, 25,000. I think I paid more for the business degree. So
she's going to be paying something like 14,500 a year for her degree. How do you justify charging her so much more than you had to pay?
Well, it'll be under the HEC system, Hamish, so it's deferred. Now, what we're doing is actually creating a system where... What we're doing is creating a system where the needs of the future will be effectively incentivised, and people will be able to mix and match. So if you choose a unit which is one of the more incentivised or more needed skills, then that will be a lower price compared to something which isn't. So you're free to mix and match, and that is... We need to try and make sure that our country has the skill base to compete with other countries in the future, because, I mean, we can have a sort of a provincial discussion about, state borders and things in Australia, but the reality is this country is competing with, very significant regional competitors for investment and jobs in the future. So
your message to Bella is you've got to see yourself in that bigger picture?
I think it's very important that we as Australians are outward-looking, optimistic people. And always wanting to make sure, certainly as policymakers, that we're pushing our parliament to enact laws which enable us to be competitive.
OK. One more question for our pollies. This is from Isaac Wade in Armidale, New South Wales.
Unions, workers and economists have all raised concerns about increasing rates of workforce casualisation. This has left workers, especially young people, without access to sick leave and in an unstable state of work during this crisis. Given the pandemic and rising rates of unemployment, are you concerned that we will see an increased rate of workforce casualisation?
All right, I want to bring our main panel back in on this conversation with the politicians. Ahmed, how much is this affecting people that you're meeting in Melbourne?
Absolutely, it's affecting a lot of young people who've lost their jobs. You know, a lot of the communities we work with and a lot of the young people I know that were the first people in March that were stood down, and there's no kind of like optimistic future about where we're going to be or where's the outlook going to be. A lot of young people are worried, and you hear about this talk about jobs of the future, but what about those young people who've been unemployed for 4, 5, 6, 7 years and haven't had access into the job market? They can't access it. In Victoria, when we had when we had record investment in terms of record amount of jobs created, young people are still from different migrant communities were actually struggling to get into the job market. And we've tried to make some serious inroads, and they've still, like right now in a pandemic when everyone's lost their job, they still continue to be pushed back. When do we have a inclusive policy to bring them back in, the long-term unemployed, the one that's just been unemployed, and make sure that we have a kind of an agreement or a plan to make sure that the recovery phase includes everyone and not leaves some people that were already struggling way behind.
Scott Jung, I'm interested to know your thoughts on this. When you're coming out of a crisis like this one, what matters, whether you have a job or whether it's full-time?
I think you've got to get your foot in the door first. And
so it doesn't matter if it's casual?
Doesn't matter if it's casual, doesn't matter if it's part-time. I think you just got to get your foot in the door, because I feel like the longer you stay unemployed, the worse your mental health gets, because you probably have a lower self-esteem for yourself. I've been in those positions before. A lot of my mates have been in those positions, so just got to get your foot in the door.
Anika Wells, your view on that?
I disagree. I think it does matter what kind of job you have, and what's happened to young workers, to people in insecure work this year, should be the smoke alarm that raises this government from its slumber on insecure work. People have been fighting against casualisation for nearly 10 years now, and the Productivity Commission just put out a couple of reports last week talking about the scarring that it has on the workforce. And what young people need out of the government by way of COVID response is minimum standards in the gig economy and cracking down on dodgy employers and a genuine say in their own workplaces. And the government started signposting that they're looking at IR reform as a way out of the COVID response. Great. But what they're saying is that they want to deregulate IR even further. Why would you make insecure work even more precarious and insecure?
I can see Andrew Bragg nodding furiously when you talk about IR.
Yeah. Well, Hamish, this is the biggest economic shock maybe in 150 years. And so we need to make sure that we have not only a competitive tax system, but that our labour laws are job-friendly. We need to be able to encourage enterprises, small, medium, large, to create new roles, because the complexity in the award system, the death of enterprise bargaining, the uncertainty around casualisation, these are major issues which are going to hold back investment. I mean, the only way to create more jobs is to increase private investment. So this IR process that the Attorney-General is leading is very important.
Jordon, Steele-John, you look furious listening to that.
Well, look, I just think it's so disconnected from the reality. I mean, the reality of what young people are experiencing in this moment is that the insecure work, the stagnant wages, and the mental health crisis that has been the background of our existence for so long has got so much worse. I think in this moment, quite clearly, of a mate of mine, known her since she was a kid. She got her first job round the corner from where I live at a cafe at 17 years old. After the first 2 weeks of working there, her employer stopped paying her superannuation. When she turned 18, they just didn't bother to pay her at the adult minimum wage. Now, why didn't she say anything about this? She didn't say anything about it because she was frightened. Where we live in the lower South Metro area of Perth, it is really hard to get a job. We have one of the highest levels or higher levels of youth unemployment in the state. It's hard enough to get a job at the best of times. Now, in March, her shift disappeared and she found herself unemployed, living without anywhere secure to live, and in the grips of a really bad mental health crisis. Now, when Job Seeker falls again in September, she does not know, Erin does not know how she will pay her rent. And as young people, Erin's story is eerily familiar to so many of us. We have youth unemployment rates of 20% in Bendigo, higher in Toowoomba, and we've got to ask ourselves a question: what do we do? And I think the answer is we can at least make sure that we maintain and increase the rates of job seeker and youth allowance, strengthen those employment laws so that young people's
I'm going to wind you up there.
And fix the mental health system, because it is not supporting us in crisis or preventing us from getting there, Hamish.
All right, well, I'm going to say thank you to our pollies tonight, Andrew Bragg, Anika Wells and Jordon Steele-John. Thank you so much for joining the conversation. Our next question tonight is a video from Ali Nora in Altona, Victoria.
As someone working in the youth sector, there's a growing frustration amongst young people that decisions which directly affect them during coronavirus, such as employment, welfare, education, are the very decisions which we haven't had a chance to give an input into. So my question for the panel tonight is, why has there been no input sought from young people, especially since we're disproportionately affected by coronavirus?
Ahmed.
We have to give young people a seat on the table. When these decisions are being made on behalf of the young people, we can't just call the experts from the universities and the different experts from different organisations. We need to include young people who are affected.
So what can you tell them about handling this crisis that they're not hearing from all the experts that they are hearing from?
Look, you need to include young people. Young people are affected by the decisions that are made by government. You know what I mean? The grassroots communities, vulnerable young people, are being impacted daily. And what they say is, no one understands my experiences. No one's, consulted us. No one. And there's another growing issue, which is, we don't want to continue to be supported. We can support ourselves. We need to be empowered. We need to be given the opportunity to lead our communities and our young people. Young people can do a lot. We need to give them the resources required to ensure that they can make the impact they know about.
Kate, I'm interested in your perspective on this, because when you were campaigning on the water issues and the fish in Menindee Lakes, you were kind of demanding a seat at the table. Was that welcomed by the people that sort of hold the power, that make the big decisions?
At times, I suppose, but what we've experienced is that government doesn't really listen to people out in rural Australia. We've just seen in our seat of Barwon, we saw a change from the Nationals for the first time in 69 years over to shooters, farmers, fishers, because we aren't getting represented. That's not just young people, that's rural people in general. And I think during this pandemic, we're seeing the exact same thing, that, people aren't getting heard, and the amount of farmers that right now are out there kicking and screaming, trying to just get across the border and get their work done, with these cross-community communities and things like that. But then also young people just trying to get to school. The amount of issues these people are facing, and their parents and them are trying to get onto politicians and work out how they can cross the border, and we're just not being heard right now. And it's amazing how, it takes so much kicking and screaming for politicians to actually understand what's going on right now. And I've been really disappointed, to be honest. Growing up, there's a lot of people that are disconnected when it comes to politics, that are young, and I think part of the reason is we just don't feel like we're ever getting heard.
Is that what you feel, Hamani?
Oh, 100%. Young people aren't being heard. There are certain organisations that do listen to young people, such as the YMCA and the Office of the Advocate for Children and Young People. But in general, other non-government organisations and government organisations aren't listening to young people, aren't bringing us into the conversation when it regards us. A lot of people, especially on this show and on other shows, they say young people are the future. Okay, if we are the future, then why aren't we not part of the conversation?
Scott, I know you want to be in politics, you have had a crack at it, and you probably don't want to dump on the political parties, but you've got to acknowledge this. They don't deal with young people in the same way they do, you know, big business or the unions either.
Hamish, I think taking personal responsibility is a very, very important ethic to have.
That's why you're a Liberal.
That's right.
But don't give me a political answer on this. Give me your personal view on whether you feel young people are being heard in this crisis.
I think we're not being heard enough. And I feel like we need to be solutions-orientated, whether it's Kate, whether it's whoever it is here and watching tonight. I feel like, how do we be heard? And I think it's so important.
But if you're not even in the parliament...
Pardon?
You know, if young people aren't even in the parliament.
They're not.
Those were some of the youngest people that are in federal politics. One of them can't even get to Canberra to sit, and because they can't, they're not allowed to vote.
Well, I think one of the practical things young people can do is sign up to a political party, and it doesn't matter if it's the Greens, the Labor Party or the Liberal Party. I think change has to come from within, and that's why I joined the Liberal Party.
Kate's shaking her head. Why?
We've dealt a lot with a lot of different parties, and in all honesty, like, you know, I see myself one day potentially going down that path, but I think there's a lot of strength not being involved in political parties as well when it comes to the water issues that we're experiencing. We work with all different, you know, people from different walks of life when it comes to politics, and I think that's one of our strengths, and that's right now with us trying to get kids across the border. I've been working today, speaking closely with the Isolated Children's and Parents Association, and they are apolitical because that is sometimes the most important way to be, because you can speak to everyone and get your message across. The idea that we have to get into politics to make change, it's not always the case.
Ahmed, can you do more outside politics than in?
You can do more outside politics, and I've seen it within my work, working with all sides of politics, and you know, advocacy is a very important part of community work. But the problem is, you can speak to all these politicians, but I think you know, change is very hard to come, and what we need to do is we rely very much on different people to kind of support the message, and I think, you know, we just need to continue pushing and working with all sides of politics, because I think that's the best way forward.
Hamish, can I make a quick point on joining a political party? I think we've got to view it in two sort of separate channels. The first channel is when you join a party, you do get a say. You get to turn up to branch meetings, you get to move policy motions, you get to propose policy motions. Now, for example, if you're
when you come on a program like this, you have to sort of wheel out the political lines rather than saying what you genuinely believe.
Well, what I genuinely believe, Hamish, is the fact that if you got, you know, 100 or 200 or 300 of your friends to join a party that has a firm belief, for example, in renewable energy or small business, then that has an impact on what the party thinks. And it might just be a ripple, but it's a little bit. And I think, second of all, I think, you know, being a political activist in the Liberal Party, I think parties need to make it simpler for people to join, understand the processes, and if you join, you don't have to hand out a flyer on election day. You could be someone that turns up to a meeting.
You believe strongly in renewable energy, in a greener future. Do you really believe you can change the direction of the Liberal Party?
Undoubtedly. Absolutely, Hamish. Of course.
Why?
And I think our Minister, Matt Keane, in New South Wales is leading the charge. I think undoubtedly we're heading that way, 100%. I
think the reality is that young people have switched off when it comes to politics. I know a lot of people that don't even bother voting now. They just say, oh, we'll just cop the fine. Because we don't, well, personally, and I know a lot of people my age, we don't trust politicians. You know, we don't see transparency, and I see this a lot when it comes to water. We've seen a lot of alleged corruption and big issues coming out. There's a real lack of trust and there's a lack of transparency. And yeah, I think it's no wonder that a lot of young people have turned off from politics.
Hamani, do you trust politicians?
Yes and no. There are certain politicians.
That's a very political answer.
Yes and no. Be quite honest, some politicians aren't doing their jobs when it comes to own electorates. It comes to the young people especially. I know for a good example of politicians listening is last year I was part of the New South Wales Youth Parliament program with the YMCA. I was fortunate enough to be the youth premier, and seeing so many young people from across this state coming together and working on bills and private member statements, being so passionate about different issues. For example, I was part of the Aboriginal Affairs Committee and we proposed a bill for an Aboriginal Education Advisory Board in all New South Wales schools, both public and private, so Aboriginal people and especially Aboriginal young students can have a say what goes on in their own school. And that's one of many examples. And there's quite a lot of youth parliament programs across this country. It's that politicians need to kick up the butt and listen and actually attend some of these sessions and some of these programs and listen to these young people because, as they say, we are the future.
All right. Let's take our next question tonight. It's a video from Eloise Dolan in North Melbourne.
With borders closed and the rules of international engagement set to shift, countries will be focusing on domestic resilience. Can young people still afford to dream big? Are international careers still an option?
OK, before I want to go to the panel, I want to bring Helen Christensen back in. You've heard the conversations tonight. What are your observations about how young people are coping?
Oh, the people here are absolutely fantastic. It's just wonderful to hear the views and, you know, even as an old person, I totally agree with all the young people. So I think I'm feeling young at heart and that's good. I think we have to realise that people really are suffering, young people are suffering, and it's the inequity too. You know, the ones that are suffering the most are the ones who are living in communities where there isn't too much cash, too much opportunity, and they're really suffering, you know, and the rurals as well, no infrastructure for internet. I mean, how can we talk about telehealth?
But what does it say about where young people are at, that in this moment of crisis when we are all so much more reliant on government than probably ever before in our lifetimes, that you hear this level of disengagement, disenfranchisement? What does that tell us?
Yeah, I think I learned something about that tonight, and I think it's very concerning because, you know, as we say, young people are the future. But I do see mass protests in the US by young people who want to change gun laws. I see people pulling themselves together in their communities and being led by young people. So I think the resilience there is really strong. I think politicians have to be listening more. I think it's just so obvious that, you know, some of the decisions we've heard about tonight are not decisions that would be made in the interests of young people. So, you know, I'm impressed, really.
Okay.
I do think we have a problem.
Let me go to you, Ahmed. This was a question about dreaming big. Can young Australians still dream big?
Yes, young Australians can dream big. They can look forward to a bright future. But I think when it comes down to, you know, the politicians and then, you know, the young people trusting politicians and then trusting government, I think what government needs to do is simplify the message, make sure it's, you know, addressing the young people. We can't just say we're going to create 30,000 jobs. What we need to do is simplify in these areas. We need to young people to study in particular areas. So, you know, without the spin, you know, government, you know, needs to kind of make sure that they don't give young people false hope. I think that's what young people have been complaining about in Melbourne. They've said, you know, there's a lot of false hope. You know, we're going to get back to work by the end of the year, by mid next year. What is the plan? Where are we going? I think young people just want to be told the truth and, you know, the steps to, you know, recovery, basically.
Scott, can you dream big?
Of course, I think anything is possible. And based on my experience last year when I was asked to run for the seat of Cogra with 8 weeks to go, and I told the campaign team that anything is possible, so give it a crack, absolutely.
OK. Kate, can you still dream big? Have you changed your plans for life because of this crisis?
Not exactly. I've been really fortunate to be not as affected. You know, I live out on an isolated property as it is. I've got 500,000 acres to run around and I can still remain socially distant. I've been really fortunate in that respect, but I think it has shone a light on the issues that we have in rural Australia and how some people are really quite disadvantaged, particularly when it comes to education. You know, kids not even being able to get to school. We don't have good enough schools out in our areas, and so a lot of the farming families around me, they're sending their kids down to Adelaide and they're either not being able to go to school because they have to quarantine or things like that, but also, you know, they can't get back home. We're hearing so many heartbreaking stories of kids, they want to go down to school, but they're not sure if they're even going to see their parents before Christmas. And that's what we're dealing with right now. And I worry about the ag industry losing these young people and them not coming home, you know, after they finish school and things. And that's what I worry about. But I think that the ag industry has such a bright future and, you know, I'm really hopeful about where it's going.
Hamani, the dreams,
yeah.
Are they huge?
Yeah, they're huge. especially coming from sort of the arts industry and it's being tough at the moment. I see like my dream is just for it to like obviously go back to normal, but it's going to be a battlefield when it comes to the art industry, especially when it comes to all industries. That if you have that passion, if you have that ambition, you can go for it if you just put your mind to it.
Have you sort of had to dig deep during this? Have you found more strength in yourself than you knew you had?
Yeah, 100%. I have that. Yeah, I have that feeling of uncertainty of when this is ever gonna stop. But I know 100% when this is over, I'm back up, back performing, and advocating for what I believe in, and making that change and to dream big.
And I think we as Australians can really take this as a chance to look at what we're doing and how we can move forward, how we can be better as a country, because the reality is that COVID is going to end. And maybe it will make us look at, whether we should be manufacturing more things, whether we should be value adding to the raw resources that we have here in Australia. And I hope that our generation might be the problem solver here. And these might be ways to get back on our feet, get young kids back into jobs. There's a lot of opportunities. And I think having young people at the table when we're discussing these opportunities that will come from it is going to be really important.
Guys, I've got to say, there hasn't been a lot of reasons to have hope in recent months, but it's been absolutely inspiring hearing from all of you. So thanks to our panel, Hamani, Tanginoa, Kate McBride, Scott Jung and Ahmed Hassan. Please put your hands together. And thanks to those of you here in the studio and to those of you at home for sending in your questions. We really appreciate it. And we are thinking of you if you're having a tough time at the moment. Next week, we're bringing together a panel of wise Australians. We're going to ask what they take away from this crisis and what they see as the way forward. Good night.